Hi and welcome. This is Rebecca Sutton with the Resilient Women Club. I have with me today Caroline Lee. She's a life coach and therapist in training. Hi, Caroline.
Hi, Rebecca.
How are you doing today?
I'm great. How are you?
Good, good. Well, I'm really interested to dive right in and get to know you better. So tell me a little bit about yourself.
Okay. So I am, as you said, a life coach and therapist in training. And I've had quite an interesting life so far. I am a wife and a mother of three, but I'm also a four-time sexual trauma survivor, and I currently live with brain cancer. And so I actually have four different brain tumors, and
Wow.
they're all the same kind of tumor. But because of the tumors, I've had two rounds of radiation therapy on my brain, and I'm visually disabled. So I've had quite an interesting journey so far over the last 35 years.
Wow. So how has the brain cancer changed your life?
Well, so my first diagnosis was when I was 18. And when that happened, one of the things that I quickly did was I started taking care of everyone else's needs, even more so than I had been before. And that was sort of like a pattern of behavior I developed early on in childhood, was really taking care of everyone else's. But I really sort of developed this idea that I needed to be strong for everyone else. And I love this, like just the whole topic that you're talking about resiliency, because I think there's something different about being resilient and putting on some sort of fake armor for everyone else, which is what I was doing at 18
Right.
and continued to do for years. And really, it took learning about my other three tumors in 2016 for me to finally start to really allow myself to just sit in what it means to grieve for the life that you're living, which is something that I do often talk to people about what it's like to sort of come to this place of what I refer to as the beautiful and, which is a place of being able to say, I have four brain tumors and I have an amazing life.
Wow.
And being able to sit in that space and hold it.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's really good. So how did these multiple times of sexual abuse challenge you?
Oh, that's a great question. I think that, the earliest trauma took place when I was 6, and, the last trauma took place when I was 24. So we're talking about years where these events sort of just came up in my life. And I think that what I learned really early on was that my worth was really only in what I could do for other people, and a lot of that was related sexually.
Mm,
And then there's also, just sort of the like neuroscience behind trauma and early childhood trauma, and how really that sort of led to pretty serious patterns of fear and control in my life, and keeping everyone else at a very, very far emotional distance. And so it wasn't until I really started to do the personal work on those traumas and really started to look into it, and I started to realize that I had really sort of barricaded myself internally. And so not only was I keeping other people distant from me, but I was keeping myself distant from myself. And holding that emotional distance for myself was really keeping me just trapped, unable to truly feel joy, unable to truly develop relationship with other people, unable to really experience any sort of positive emotion at a deep intrinsic level. However, pain was something I knew, and I knew it so, so well. And so it wasn't until I started to really dive into the work and really started to work on healing and processing that trauma did I realize that, like, there is this whole other life available to me that I never even knew existed because I was so young when all of this started.
right. So how did you come to find your passion?
So that's such a good question. When I started really when I made a decision, because that's really what it starts with. When I made the choice and I made the decision that I wanted to start healing, because I realized I was never going to find real love or happiness. I wasn't ever going to feel alive, because that was a big part of it. When you're trapped inside internally, it's very hard to feel like you're actually living. And so when I made the choice to actually start pursuing something different, even though I had
Mm-hmm.
no idea what that was or what it looked like, that sort of evolved into a whole different variety of things. And so I definitely, I was doing a lot of therapy. I found the right therapist for me, which is always crucial in therapy, is finding the right person. Um, and I also was doing a ton of reading. I used to work as a freelance book reviewer for psychcentral.com. And because
Oh,
of that,
wow.
it was really like, this was the best gig ever.
Divine.
Oh my gosh, it was so good. So that came to me in like 2008, I think. And it was the most random thing that I found, the post where they were calling for reviewers. And so I they would send me a book for free. So I would get a free book, and I'm a total book nerd. This is not even like a fifth of what I have. Um, but they would send me a book for free, and I'd read this book, and then I'd get to write my opinion on it, and then they would put it on their website and pay me. It was the
Wow.
best deal. It was so great. But because of it, I had this plethora of resource available to me, because I was consistently getting more and more work. All of it was about mental health, self-help, psychology, all of it. And so anytime there was something that was even closely related to what I thought I was experiencing or what I thought I needed to work on, I jumped on it as fast as I could. And so that was really helpful, just doing the reading and really like applying the work that was in the book. So if it was a book
Wow.
that had steps, I applied it. I tried it out. There was one book I can think of that was like a book for couples. And while my husband and I have an amazing marriage, I was like, hey, you're going to be my guinea pig and we're going to try this stuff out. But so it was, it's doing the work, it's making these choices, and the choices are so crucial to really understanding why you're making the choices. And so a lot of, I think, the real personal work that comes up in healing is taking the time to be quiet and still, so that you can actually start to get to know yourself and start to take off all of those layers and all of the armor that's been built up over the years. And, I talk about sometimes about having an emotional straitjacket, which is what I sort of put myself in when I was 6 as a protective measure. And so part of the healing, I think, at least for my sexual trauma healing, it was learning how to remove the straitjacket. And sometimes that's slow, sometimes it's quick, sometimes you take it off for 5 minutes, you put it right back on. But it's getting comfortable with removing the straitjacket, starting to really feel your emotions, starting to really be present in the moment, and being present with yourself and really getting to know who you are. All of that is what ultimately led me to figure out what I was really passionate about. So that's kind of a long-winded answer.
No, that's great. That's great. I teach in my course that really there's two things that really make you happy and able to move forward into the life of your dreams. And that's, one is the support network or community,
Hmm.
and the other is knowing your passion.
Yeah.
Because it's something to get up every morning and get excited about.
Hmm.
And it
Absolutely.
really drives you. And the interesting thing is once I discovered my passion, I had to go through a bunch of junk to get
Hmm.
rid of. And
Right.
then I was able to step into the fullness of it.
Yeah,
Isn't that
absolutely.
amazing?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's so interesting how much we can layer on top of ourselves, and what we don't realize when we're doing it, whether it's for protection or it's because we're told that's what we should do, or whatever other reason. But I think what's interesting is we don't often realize how much we're disconnecting from ourself when we
Mm,
add those layers on.
that's true.
Hmm.
That's great. Well, how did all this make you a resilient woman?
Well, I think it's a few things. I think one of the things that it did was it, I mean, I have a toolbox of stuff at this point. I have an insane amount of ideas or tools or techniques for how to handle life, because life is a full spectrum. It's both the positive and the negative. And so I have this amazing toolbox of things that I know are very helpful for me, or that, are going to be helpful to somebody at some point. So I think that's one thing. I think also, I think one of the interesting things about resiliency is that we don't often consider the amount of self-compassion it requires.
Mm.
And self-compassion is one of the practices that I try to consistently do it at some point every day. But we need that when we're talking about resiliency, because if we're spending so much time in judgment about what we're going through, or about how we're feeling about what we're going through, or judging what we're thinking about what we're going through, we end up making the whole situation harder. And it can be even more complicated because we've just layered judgment on top of all the things going on. And so I think that learning self-compassion through all of this work that I was doing just in my own healing process was it's incredibly crucial going forward. And it was incredibly crucial in my healing process. So I think those are probably the two biggest things. I think the other thing too is that um, I think that just being able to look back, I a couple of weeks ago with one of my coaches that I've currently hired, um, she asked me to like make a list of the things I've overcome, and I hadn't done that in a really long time.
Mm.
And I journaled about that for like 45 minutes straight. And when I sat back, I was like, that's such a good reminder. And I think that's one of the things is that resiliency doesn't have to be about overcoming sexual trauma. It doesn't have to be about living with brain cancer. It doesn't have to be about living through anything that someone else might see on a scale of 1 to 10 is like 10 super bad, right?
Right.
Resiliency can be as simple as you made it through another day of quarantine without shaving your head off. Just full blown, all the hair is gone. Like, and if that's what you want to do, by all means, go for it. Like, no judgment on that. But, I think that we all exhibit resiliency at some point. We just don't recognize it. And so
Mm.
I think that's one of the things that's come up for me over the years is I can recognize the big things that have made me resilient, but I'm also able to also acknowledge the smaller things that have made me resilient.
Wow. So you said self-compassion was one tool. What are
Mm-hmm.
some other tools in your tool belt that you like to highlight for people?
So self-compassion, self-care for sure. And I'm I know this is like a huge topic right now because of COVID and everybody's having to stay home. But when I talk about self-care, I'm talking about the activities that really help nourish the soul. So it's very personalized. It's very specific to each person. And it doesn't need to take, an hour or even like 30 days to do it. It doesn't have to be like a 30-day challenge. It can be a single minute or even 30 seconds. And so really taking the time to figure out what I'm passionate about and who I am, because those two things will really guide and um, really inform the right self-care for each person. And so being able to do that and really being able to fine tune what that list looks like was really crucial for me. And so for me, one of the things that's necessary, so this is sort of like answering more about self-care, but also answering your question. One of my self-care techniques is um, like crafts, and specifically more crochet. And the reason why that's so important is that doing handcrafts like crocheting and knitting, embroidery, like needlework, all of those things can actually put the brain in a meditative state.
Mm-hmm.
And what's really important for me in both my healing and just my general self-care is being able to be present in the moment. So being able to be mindful about what's going on, where I am in my body, and being able to go into a meditative state in my brain is one way to do that. So that's another really crucial component to my toolbox is the self-care component and also the mindfulness component. And I think also boundaries,
Mm.
like learning what
Yeah.
are boundaries. And when I talk about boundaries, it's multidimensional from my perspective. So it's There's relational boundaries, there are physical boundaries, you have emotional boundaries, and you have mental boundaries. So there's 4 different dimensions to it. And being able to recognize those 4 different types of boundaries, being able to figure out which boundaries I really needed for me to feel safe, for me to feel respected, for me to feel loved, cared for, whatever, or just feel nourished in my life. Those things, being able to recognize those boundaries, being able to set them, and then being able to hold them. You know,
Hmm.
I come from a history of codependent behaviors. And
Hmm.
so holding boundaries, that was so hard to learn, but so
Yes,
incredibly crucial. And I think for anyone who wants to be resilient, boundaries are crucial.
absolutely. And
Yeah.
I think boundaries are tied to understanding our values.
Yes.
Knowing
Totally.
exactly what we believe in and stand for will help
Yeah.
you set those boundaries.
Yes. And that was definitely part, like finally learning my boundaries was a huge component of the work that I did to just get to know who I am.
Hmm.
And exactly as you said, knowing your boundaries, knowing your beliefs, all of that was incredibly crucial.
Wow. Well, you're very knowledgeable. I can tell you've read a lot of books and you've done a lot of work and inner work. I mean, it's been wonderful to talk to you. Tell me a little bit about your work.
So I'm a life coach. I specialize in helping women really connect with who they are beyond all of the layers that we've even talked about, and really diving in and connecting to that person so that they have a very, like, to their core, bone through knowledge of who they are. And in that process, we also work on developing the self-care that's going to help them stay connected, developing the boundaries that are necessary, developing the communication skills in order to set and hold boundaries, but also be able to communicate from their true self. And then I've also recently expanded, and now I'm starting to focus more in helping women process through their mother wound and move into a life that they actually want beyond that. So that's the mother wound is sort of referring to it's the negative beliefs and behavior patterns and negative narratives that we've taken on from our relationship with our mother. And so I've recently started doing that, and I'm actually in the process of launching a whole program around it.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Where can we find you online?
So you can find me most frequently in my Facebook group. It's facebook.com/groups/a cared for heart. It's a group that's just mostly women, and all we do is work around self-worth, self-care, self-identity, and we're going to start doing some mother wound work in the next few weeks. So you can find me there, or you can find me, you can find my business page on Facebook as at facebook.com/cared for heart.
Great. Well,
Awesome.
thank you so much for spending time with me and sharing your story and all your special tips and
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for
tools.
having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to seeing you online.
Absolutely.
Take care.
You too.
Bye bye.
Bye.